At the end of the day, it's all about freedom.
Everybody's got their little pet project, and if you look at the Bush administration, I mean, it was like everyone got their pet project. It's not just that he raised the defense budget and started all these wars and spent money overseas. I mean, everything. The Medicare expansions, the Department of Education expansion. I mean, it was a runaway nightmare. And then, of course, Obama came in and outdid him. You know, a lot of people forget about W. Bush as the big spender because Obama came in and spent, you know, like a drunken sailor and kind of outdid the memory of George W. Bush. It really is amazing if you take a look at the budget. And I made this point, I was on Kennedy yesterday. If you were to cut, you know, we're projected to spend around $4 trillion this year. $4 trillion. Anyway, but so we're projected to spend around $4 trillion this year. And I just made the point that if you cut half of it, if you cut $2 trillion out of the budget, you would have a government the size of the government under George W. Bush. It really is insane. And he was expanding the government at a rate that we couldn't believe. So this is the weird dynamic you have, right? Where the spending is so out of control, it's laughable. If you look at it in a chart, it's obvious that spending is the problem, and this is what we need to cut back. And as Ron Paul would always point out, spending is all that matters. I think this is really important right now as the Republicans are talking about, you know, we're doing Obamacare now, but they keep talking about tax reform coming off in the future. Okay, look, I would be very happy to see massive tax cuts. Even short of getting the spending cuts we want, it's still better than not to have the tax cuts. And if they're talking about actual tax cuts and not just what George W. Bush did, where you're talking about, you know, going from 39 to 35%, but if you're talking about some major tax cut, that would be a very, very good thing. I won't hold my breath. But if we see some indication of that, I will certainly let you know this is positive. You know, I'll keep an open mind about that stuff. However, as Ron Paul used to say, spending is what really matters. That's what really matters. Because once the money is spent, it's a tax. I mean, once the money is spent, it has to be recouped some way. And they have different ways of recouping it. So, of course, one is the direct tax. There's an income tax. There's also other taxes, but, you know, one is a direct income tax from, you know, taking money from your income. Okay. There's lots of other ways that they do it. They also borrow money, and they also print money. And, you know, in many ways, you could argue that those are even more deceitful, because at least with the income tax, you feel it. You know what you're paying. And you'll, if you take too much, you'll get some pushback. But when printing money, it's a lot, you know, people don't see that. They just wonder why their prices are going up in a couple decades. But the point Ron Paul was making, that all of these things are a tax. Printing money is a tax, borrowing money is a tax. So really, it's all about cutting spending. That's the number one metric that you should look at. And of course, that is where I have zero confidence that these Republicans will come through. So, as I was saying, government spending, we could cut government in half, and still have a government that's far too bloated. And we're not going back to like the 50s or the 20s or something like that. You know, we're going back to 2004. Those ancient primitive times.